Okay. Hello. I hope you had a nice weekend. I had a nice weekend, at the same time, it's the end of the term. So we have 2 more weeks. Stay with me for 2 more weeks. And we will come to the end of this course. Today, what we're going to do today I want to talk to you about interviews. About how to do interviews, what interviews are, how from a research point of view we deal with these kind of things. And, as I had promised you, we'll have some visitors today. They're running a little late. So we have some folks from RTE coming, talking to you about this study that we here at UCD are involved in. And that I hope that many of you guys will get involved in as well. It's a study on the young generation in Ireland, on young people in Ireland. Hi, Steve. So I hope that actually they launched this survey just recently. I was just told that almost 17,000, 18,000 people already participated in that study. So it's sort of a big study that is happening here in Ireland right now, but it's also happening at the rest of Europe. So in other countries, it's going on at the same time as well. But we'll come back to that. In a bit. So before, let me mention a few other things. It is.
We're ready to send out the viewer.
Okay. What do you need?
You just need to log into the system.
Yeah, I need this one right now. But you can set up your computer next to it if you want. Yeah. While those guys are setting things up, let me tell you some other things that you actually are important for you. So it's not just the last tutorial that is happening this week, but it's also the exam coming up. The exam is coming up, and people are freaking out about it. And to some degree, I think it's kind of healthy. If you don't freak out about something, you don't take it seriously. And you better take this seriously. I think you have to take this seriously. The exam starts, is on the 11th of May, but don't nail me down on that, so the administrators know more about that. And that's sort of the last information that I had, but you can see these things. People are freaking out about it. What to do about it? Well, there's a simple solution to that. Study. So this is a course. I told you from the very beginning onwards. I believe in this being very transparent and so on. So when you do what I tell you, when you do the readings, when you look at the lectures, when you study the material, you will do well in the exam. At the same time, if you don't do that, you will not do well in the exam. Right? So that's sort of a very clear deal that I think that we have here. But as people ask me, I put together another document. I put together something that I call the exam preparation guide. So you find that in Blackboard. You find that under assignments, but I also put it under syllabus, where you give you a little more advice, a little more help for how you should best study for the exam, right? So, and there you will see that actually, when I look at what makes people successful and others not successful, it is studying. It is hard work, right? With talent, you can only get that far. I don't know, maybe 10% of the whole thing is talent. The other 90% is hard work. Yeah? And once you kind of realize that, it's actually incredibly liberating and freeing up, because it tells you that no matter where you are, you can do well in this exam. Right? And that's sort of how this whole thing is set up, how this whole thing is designed. And once you kind of understand that, it took me sort of 3 years of studying to understand that talent isn't everything. That kind of doesn't, you can wing a few things, but after that, you really need to sit down and you need to study. And in the exam preparation guide, I give you some ideas about how you should do that, right? And about what you should do. So what are the components of that? There's no surprise here. It's really no surprise. You won't be surprised by the exam. Everything will have been talked about here in the lecture. Everything that you will see in the exam will have been part of this lecture. So go back and revisit the material. You have access to the audio, to the video of the whole lectures. How cool is that? So you won't be surprised. You won't be surprised. You find all the recordings on Blackboard, but they are on YouTube. So the recordings, there were readings for each of the lectures. The lectures were based on these readings. If you've done the readings, it's fine. Now it's great. You don't have. It's much easier for you to revisit the material. If you haven't, you better get started with the readings. However, as I outlined in the exam preparation guide as well, there will not be a question about something that is in the readings and that we did not talk about in the lecture. So there will only be the material that we talked about in the lecture that will be required for you to know in the exam. Go back to the assignments that you guys had to do. That's very helpful as well. And lastly, at the end, we had our big quiz. Right? That sort of, there are sneaky questions in there. But after you've gone through this process of revising the material for this course, going back there can be extremely helpful to see where you stand. Okay. So what we will have as well, next week there won't be any new material. Next week we'll have review sessions of some of the material that I know that you guys told me in the little survey that we had before. But also I will base that on what you guys tell your tutors this week. So if there's some stuff that you want me to revisit, tell your tutors. I can only revisit what I know, where we should talk more about. And then we'll have yet another big quiz on next week, Wednesday's lecture, right, to round this whole thing up. Okay, the last advice that I want to give you here on this exam preparation stuff, I'm a big fan of study groups. We've already shown, we had this experiment here. You are already incredibly smart, but as a group you are even smarter, right? The wisdom of the crowd, it really works. So it really is helpful. It is helpful to study that, at the very least to give you the feeling that you're not alone with this, or to have some drinks with folks afterwards. I'm certainly going to do that with tutors as soon as this thing is done. Okay, so that's the introduction about the exam. So now we have some folks from RTE over here. Let's have them come over here and tell you a little more about this study that is currently in the making right now. So it's a study on the young generation in Ireland. Study on this young generation in Ireland. Now, you guys, you are part of the young generation of Ireland. I'm part of the young generation of Ireland. Stephen is maybe not part of the young generation of Ireland.
Just see I'm coming up there. Yeah. Okay. So, what do you think?
Okay, well, we also have Stephen, he's from RTE, and Midas, the production company, who is at the background of this. But we also have, I told you, we have the face of this, so that's Egan McDermott. He's here. He's a TV presenter, radio host. Probably you guys know him more than I do. I'm new to Ireland. I don't know the people here yet. But Egan, it's great to have you here. It's great to have you here. So he will talk to you about this as well. You will see more about this. So Egan, if you want to come and say a few words to the folks.
So is there sound? Can we get sound out of it as well? Great. Super.
Okay, on to you. Can Owen borrow your mic?
No, either this or that.
Owen, you take that there. I'm going to move over there, yeah.
One. Hello, everybody. My name is Owen. It was a very valiant attempt at pronouncing it, but thank you, all the same. So I'm a former UCD student. I did politics and Irish, and predominantly known now for having shit hair and telling worse jokes on a singing show. But this is kind of going more back to my roots, which is lovely. It's called Generation What, as you can see. It's a snapshot. It's the first official snapshot of this generation, 18 to 34, and it's part of this bigger kind of pan-European movement across a whole range of spectrums like sex and politics and religion and like personal fulfillment and enfranchisement, and our connection to ourselves and Europe and a whole range of topics. And it's already been taken by about 17,000 people, which is a phenomenal amount, but the aim is to get kind of 30,000 plus people to do it. So it's, like I say, it's across a mad range of stuff. I'm sure being sociology students, you're kind of aware of that phenomenon of this generation being unhappy, kind of borderless and wild expectations and ambitions or whatever. It's like that Kardashian phenomenon of maybe not having a quantifiable talent, but believing you can do anything and go anywhere and be anything. So expectations of people are up here, their reality is here, and this middle space is people's unhappiness. So this generation is kind of the freest and the most ambitious and the most highly educated, but at the same time the most unhappy. We're not really that religious anymore. We're not connected to the church maybe the way our parents were. So there's all these kind of weird phenomena going on. So this is a snapshot of who we are, what we think about a whole range of stuff. We're going to show just a little slideshow. We'd love people kind of in their own time maybe to take the survey. Like I say, 17,000 Irish people have already taken it. And in France, it was a massive success. I think it's over a quarter of a million
Yeah.
have taken it. So as you fill out the survey, most of them are just kind of click and answer. So there's a lot of questions, but it's quite easy to do, and it moves at a snappy pace. But you can stop and compare yourself, your equivalent, like in France, for example. I heard some girls talking about it we did a thing on it on 2FM the other day, and one of the girls, Kira, lived in France for a while, and she was said her opinion of French people would be that they're quite forward and sexually liberated or whatever. And then when she took the survey and compared her results just from like French guys coming up to her in Paris and the way they spoke to her and their expectations, like in any kind of sexual interactions, she just thought they were going to be like wildly liberal. But when she looked at it, actually they're kind of rooted still a little bit in Christianity, and they're a bit more conservative than Irish people are sexually. So it's not all about sex, of course, but on all of the things, and a lot of this slideshow that you'll see, it's a little bit, hey, let's get people's attention. Have you ever had a wank in a toilet? These kind of silly things. But there's deeper things as well. So, you know, if you're looking at some of the questions, it is kind of attention grabbing, but there is kind of deeper, more thought-provoking stuff. So we'll just run through a few slides and get an idea of what it's about. Hey.
Holy shit.
What kind of question is that, of course?
God save your body as a temple. I need your temple at home.
I'm not interested. Stop looking at me like that.
This year, RTE wants you to enlighten us about what it means to be young and Irish in 2016. We're calling it Generation What?
Sorry.
A new mega-survey has young people give their opinions on a range of subjects and issues that are affecting all of our lives today.
From school,
I hated school.
Yeah, I loved school. It traumatized me for years.
work,
Yeah, money's nice, but it's not the job that I want.
family.
Have you ever smoked a joint with your parents?
Not my parents, no.
Politics,
Politicians are corrupt.
Totally.
and of course, sex.
That was really lame,
I'm
sorry.
going to say yes.
Sure, look. Bob's your uncle, you know. Moves very quickly.
Before you say something, I haven't heard
So as you can see, we've already spoken to a lot of people and they've answered our questions openly and honestly. But to get the full picture, we need you to do the same.
Generation What is an exciting, comprehensive online survey which is live across Ireland right now. When you log on to our site and complete the questionnaire, you'll be able to access videos and see the footage we've already filmed of other 18 to 34-year-olds. And you'll be able to compare your answers to theirs.
Oh, nice! What about girls wearing the veil in the street or at work?
Deeply bothers me.
Over the summer, your answers will be collated and analysed by a group of sociologists. And once they've done their bit, we'll bring you the results in 2 documentaries later this year. We'll show politicians and other policymakers what you said and see how tuned in they are with our generation and whether they take us seriously or not.
A lot of them, they're out of touch with what people did.
I just know that they talk a load of crap.
I love it.
Do it right now, check it out. generation-what.ie.
So grab your laptop or tablet and take part in one of the biggest surveys about young people ever conducted in Ireland. Do it today.
So that was just the first promo, which obviously doesn't go very deep into anything, but some of the questions and some of the answers, like your expectations are kind of confounded a lot. Like the veil in the street one, I kind of think we're living in the most kind of forward-thinking, liberal, accepting generation ever, but the amount of people who admitted like a discomfort, you know, when encountering Muslim people, which is part of this probably a wider media stereotyping and you know, stuff going on in Europe. So there's loads of little interesting little snapshots that will throw themselves up. You know, 1916, would you go to war for your country if a force was mobilized, ISIS for example? Would you die for your country? The amount of people who said no was fascinating, and I kind of thought in this you know, whirlwind of patriotism that we're in, that everybody would say yes or kind of get swept up in that. But so we'll just got a few shorter clips of more specific questions. So we'll have a little fly through. This is the categories. You can see there's 150 questions. It is comprehensive: family, peers, self, society, the future, and then there's little subsections within that. So we'll jump on to the first one. Family. Are your parents proud of what you've achieved? You Facebook friends with your parents, ever smoked a joint with your parents? Should be happy without children. So say some kind of headline grabby ones, and then some ones that would kind of generate a little bit more conversation. So we'll have a look.
Are your parents proud of what you have achieved so far?
You answer that one first.
God. I'd like to say yes.
Yes. I think our parents will be proud about their children as long as you're doing your best.
Maybe. I know my mum was. I was in college, I suppose, when she died. She wanted to see her children doing well, so maybe, I don't know.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're recently married and everything, so they're very happy with me at the moment.
Well, my dad doesn't really like it. I think my mum is.
There's been a lot of challenges. Me being a single mother, it's hard, and I think my parents are quite proud of the fact that I can do it by myself.
I'm the first PhD in my family, so in my entire extended family, so they're very proud of that.
Yeah. My mum especially, she's born years obviously, she'd tell anyone, but she's always talking to people about me. I got an article published in Women's Way about 2 months ago, and she was waving it around the job as if it was the tricolour.
Like, she'd always tell stories about how smart I was. Like, it was in primary school when the teachers were just like, she's away with the fair, she's not paying attention, all this. And my mum was like, oh, what work are you getting? She goes, the same as everyone else. She was doing that last year. You're not challenging her.
I did well enough in the leaving certs, about 5-10 points, which was just enough to get me into a decent college. So I'm happy now that I'm in education, I'm studying something I love, and that I have what appears to be a bright enough future ahead of me.
So again, just a few little headlines, but even on that, like we're talking about, the baby boom generation and our parents and whatnot, and their kind of main focus was get a steady job, get a pension, raise a family early, and kind of the digression from that, has thrown up a lot of parents who feel a little bit removed from their children or can't identify with their reality or their horizons or whatever. So again, these are all just little headlines. Peers, do you have friends you can rely on? Does it bother when when girls wear low-cut jeans? It's like a question from Clueless with the G-string showing. Background, ethnicity of your closest friend. Describe your generation in one word.
Some of your closest friends are from a different social background, are from a different ethnic group,
are from a different religion, are from a different culture,
have a different school education, have a different sexual orientation.
Are much older or younger than me, are none of the above.
Have a different planet. That'd be amazing. My closest friends are all like Irish.
I don't have as many, most of my friends are bloody white. I have few are like, they're awfully boring, like people, because white people, most of my friends are sad people. I do, definitely people from different classes, definitely people of different ages. I have friends in their late teens and friends in their 50s,
A lot of my closest friends, who I know from my local area, are all actually quite similar to me in terms of background and in terms of ethnicity. I think that's sort of part and parcel of living in the suburb.
The self, the body, sexuality, self-image, feelings. Could you live without the internet? Could you be happy without sex? Have you ever had a threesome? Have you ever masturbated? Have you got any tattoos? Headline stuff.
We're going to skip this question. Let's keep it.
Have you ever made love in a public place?
Suppose I have a house now, what's the point of doing it in public?
In a car, in a nightclub before, most recently in the disabled toilet in the pub.
Again, I wouldn't recommend it. We're better off using the bed.
Excellent.
Sorry about it, Brian.
Take part in one of the biggest surveys about young people ever conducted in Ireland. Head over to generation-what.ie and let's enlighten Ireland about our generation.
It's all very High School Musical voiceover. But so you get kind of the idea, like I said, this is all kind of very headline stuff. We just got a few group of people to shoot some promos. They're kind of little videos you click as you fill out the survey. But the conversations with people, they get a lot deeper and a lot more insightful, and some of it's worrying and some of it's kind of inspiring and warming and whatnot. But just basically we just popped in to say hello, and we'd love if people would take the survey. Start to finish it takes about 15 minutes, but you can, if you haven't got that time to sit down, you can save your answers and come back to it later. It's do it on your own or do it with a gang of friends. It's kind of a personal thing, and it can also be funny for some of the things. But it's generation-what.ie. We'd love as many people to get involved as possible. Like I said, 17,000 have already done it, and when we close it and all the people have taken it, we're going to throw it over to the sociology department, and we have some sociologists who are going to analyse it all. And like I said, we're going to do 2 documentaries about it and kind of compare it with the policy that's been implemented by your politicians and lawmakers and see if it's actually in tandem with what people, experience, see, think, feel. So that's it. Generation-what.ie. And thanks for your time and thanks for letting us today. Thank you.
Thanks. Very good.
Thanks. No. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry guys, did you steal my dongle for the computer? Thanks, alright. Those guys. Okay, so I was very happy for those guys to come over and to tell you about this project, not only because I think this is a very, very important research project, right? And we are at UCD, we are just in the center of this right now. We are the sociologists, right? So they say the sociologists do the work, so now you see where my summer is going. So I encourage you to participate so that we can actually have a look at that. But it's also, there are other colleagues from the department involved, so it's a bunch of other colleagues. Some of you know Jerry, he's involved in this, Sherry Boucher, Irla, who was here, Irla Watson, Sarah Soul is involved in this. So it's sort of a collective effort that we think that that is very, very interesting and could be very inspiring to have a look at. So, but there's also a second element why I was really happy for having those guys come here, because this is research in practice. This is what this course is about at the end of the day, right? We talk about how you do research. We talk about what you need to think about when you do research. This is a research project. They do interviews, they have surveys, they have people talk about these kind of things. So how cool is that? It gives me an opportunity to really talk to you about interviews. And to continue up on that. So that's what I'm going to do now. Well, when you look at how folks do social science research, it's stuff that you guys might not be really aware of, but it's really fragmented, right? And it's especially so, I know when I'm preparing for this course and I look at textbooks, some guys say that and others say that, and to some stuff I just deeply disagree. About social science is very, very fragmented, and people do very different things. So when you look at, for example, the types of research, some people say all we can do is interpret stuff. We cannot really get to the real truth of something because everything is a social construction. Everything is sort of just a meaning-making process in a way. While then others say, okay, well, we should describe as carefully and as direct as possible in a way. Well, then at the very end, I think that's what I believe in. We should aim to explain. We should aim to explain why the world works the way it works. What you also find is sort of at the very first lecture, I had this distinction between quantitative and qualitative research. Quantitative research is more about numbers. You have variables, and at the end you have some sort of statistics or anything. While qualitative is more like not not necessarily quality in that sense, or that the one is more quality than the other, but it's more stuff that defies measurement. Some things that you cannot really put into numbers. But I come back to that. And people go to battles on these kind of things. There are sort of departments where folks just don't talk with each other. They have just completely different ideas about how we should do social science and so on and so forth. I think it's complete bullshit. It's complete bullocks to have these distinctions. I don't buy into them. I think at the end what matters is what you want to do, and then you choose the method and the way to get to that. That's also why in this lecture I'm not really making a very strong distinction between these things, because I think it's not really helpful. It doesn't bring us any further. But let's talk about qualitative research and come back to that a little bit, what it is. As I already said, it's sort of this research that produces observations that are not so easily reduced to numbers. Right? Maybe you cannot measure everything in the world. Maybe you cannot measure how things think, and just the very fact of trying to put this into numbers already distorts the whole picture, right? So there, qualitative researchers come into play, and a lot of my colleagues actually do that kind of stuff. You have other courses on qualitative research methods in the second and the third year and so on that you can take with Sarah, one of my colleagues here. And it includes a range of data collection methods, including field notes, one-to-one and focus group interviews, here we are, or other forms that produce content that just cannot be put into numbers. So that's basically this general idea. Maybe some things are just not that easily be put in numbers, right? So then a qualitative approach, and that's sort of where the quality comes from, has this idea. Instead of, as you will see, instead of trying to generalize, instead of trying to have a representative view of the world in a way, the idea is to dig deep, to go in and have these in-depth studies, in-depth interviews. And as already you pick up, and this is another reason why I have those guys coming in here, because now people realize, hang on, maybe we have to mix our approaches. Maybe we should have some interviews like you just saw, where people ramble off after a cue, combined with a large-scale survey that hopefully you guys will participate and you guys will tell your friends about. Right? So that gives us different perspective on things, and that's sort of the development that we nowadays have in social science research. Okay, so what are the main intentions behind the qualitative research paradigm, if you want to call it like that? The idea is to see through the eyes of others, take the role of the participants, really try to understand what is driving them. This can lead to unexpected findings. That's sort of something that people say is sort of like a mark of qualitative studies, that something bubbles up, right? But again, I don't really buy into these distinctions, because you can have the same thing with quantitative studies as well. And if you do that, that's exactly how it works. There's also stuff bubbling up and so on. But however, the emphasis, or what qualitative research methods are good in, is seeing through the eyes of others, trying to give a description and emphasis on the context, and have some flexibility in its structure. So traditionally, people used to distinguish these things, used to say that, remember at the very beginning we had this idea of induction and deduction. Like deduction is this idea you have theories and then you deduce something from these theories that you then go and test. While induction would be you have some observations and you try to generalize from that and come up with theories. Okay? So there's sort of this distinction between theory building on the one side and theory testing on the other side. And traditionally people thought, or some people still say, that quantitative studies are more theory testing, while qualitative studies are theory building and so on. Or some people say that quantitative studies are more explanatory, while the qualitative studies are more exploratory, and so on. But to be honest, about all these different things, I think it's bullshit. I think you can have qualitative studies that are theory testing the same way you can have quantitative studies that are theory building. I don't believe in these distinctions here anymore. So that's sort of my intro to saying, let's not fight a battle that is a lost cause. Let's not try to pick a camp, create some fault lines that are not really there, but instead think about what your question is and what you want to do, and then use the method or approach that is the best one to answer your questions. So what are strengths of the qualitative research paradigm? well, it lends itself to producing more theories, not to say that is all it does, but because you're kind of focusing on your listening, you're really trying to have an open mind about what folks say, and then you realize, oh, hang on, they're saying this or that, and maybe these are the theories that could come out from that. Now it's about producing unexpected findings as well, but these are really just the things. Now, let me get this straight. This is not exclusive, right? But that's sort of traditionally how people thought about these things, and where still the strength of a qualitative research approach are. What are some weaknesses of qualitative research when you go on, when you do interviews? And that's another big mistake that quantitative folks, I know lots of quantitative folks. I'm coming from a very quantitative area, but I'm very open to these other research approaches. But people say that qualitative studies are extremely subjective, right? It's what those 5 guys said that you just saw, right? How can we say something about Ireland from that? How can we say something about a whole generation from that, right? It's difficult to replicate because it's so unstructured sometimes, or generalizations are difficult to make, and sometimes it's also unclear what actually happened. You saw now a little interview with it, they say, but you don't know the context. So how did that happen, right? Was there a camera team? There must have been a camera team in their bedroom. How would you react if there would be a camera team in your bedroom? What would you tell them? Would you really tell them about how many times you masturbate? Right? There's sort of a camera focusing on you. People try to present themselves in a certain way. So this kind of stuff that we need to think about when we do research, when we use interviews in this particular context. But now let me move on and let me talk about interviews. That's sort of the topic of today that I wanted to talk to you about. Interviews is sort of the poster boy of qualitative research strategies. Right? There are other ones. You can have focus groups. You can have ethnography. You can have some content analysis and whatnot, right? You can look up all these things in books, and we might talk more about some other qualitative research approaches, methods on Wednesday. But interviews is sort of the standard one that people think about, right? And now, when we talk about qualitative interviews is really this idea that contrasting to surveys, we talked about surveys at length, where people get questions and they're very fixed and they're very clear, very straightforward, and then there's the next question, right? And you basically look it through, or you click yourself through on the website. Qualitative interviews, they are more based on a set of topics to be discussed in depth, rather than with the use of standardized questions. So it's really what they do. They are less structured, less standardized. Interviews, the idea is to take the viewpoint of the participant, and it encourages what some call rambling off. Basically, you throw them a nugget. That's sort of a bit what they did here as well. Right? They give them a little nugget, a little question, and then they actually, there's a different logic for TV folks. They want to see a reaction of some people that sells, right? But from a researcher's point of view, it's kind of giving them a little nugget to have sort of then talk about stuff that you not necessarily thought about before, right? Then they bring up stuff. They bring up ideas or viewpoints that you didn't think are relevant here, right? And if you would not have allowed people to ramble off in that sense, you would not have been able to pick on these kind of things that bubble up. Some of the stuff that those folks talked about, some of the stuff that they realized while shooting these scenes, while people were interviewed and then talked about stuff. And as you will see, I have a slide at the end of that. There's sort of different degrees on how much we let people ramble off. It's basically the amount of control that you still have. And then you realize that at the end of the day, these things are not too different from the stuff that we already did. It's just that you give away some of the control that you have, right? Instead of just having a very controlled environment, having a very, very written down question where you don't even interact with somebody, but instead you have them click on a computer screen, ideally in your laboratory environment or something like that. You actually talk with them, right? And you see this then can be related to the topics that you talk about or the questions, but you can really, that's sort of where the art of interviewing then comes into play, where you really need to learn these things about how to follow up on stuff. So doing good qualitative interviews seems easy at first, but it's actually incredibly difficult. At least I think. Yeah, I still haven't figured out how to do it. You know? But I'm working on that. You know, I have colleagues that I'm working with that, and other colleagues are just better with that, and I bring other things to the table. So it encourages this rambling off, and gives you more flexibility. Say you interview somebody about what it means to be Irish, and then they say something, and then you follow up on that. Then you kind of dig deeper and hang on a moment. What do you mean with that? Or what does it? How does it come about? Right? So you follow, you probe, and then you follow up on things. So the idea is more on understanding, going deep, than on generalizing. Right? So that's the thing that people sometimes have troubles with. It just means that you do different things. You cannot say by interviewing 5 people, and sometimes I see that, students interview 5 or 10 people, and then they pretend as if this would be representative for Ireland. This can never be representative for Ireland. Whole sampling issues that we talked about, maybe there's a selection effect here, or maybe that's another thing about this study. Imagine those guys, they need to be willing to talk about stuff on TV. So as a researcher, I could immediately tell you that most likely, those people are a different kind of people. When you are a little more shy, right? I don't know, it's just a different personality that you might have. I don't know, maybe you might not be that excited to be on RTE television and be talked about how many times you masturbate and how many times you do other things and so on, right? So that's something we really need to think about, and that's something that, as researchers, we come into play, and I always feel like the bad cop in these kind of things, because I always have to tell those guys, listen, hang on. This might not be representative here. Right? You need to be aware of what you're doing here. You use that as a trailer, and as a trailer it's absolutely fine. Yeah, maybe to get some more ideas about what's happening and so on. But you cannot generalize from that, because most likely there are some selection effects happening here. Right? Both on your side, most likely you selected some guys who are willing to talk, right, or who are sort of, I don't know, maybe a little more extrovert, they're kind of more photogenic, or what the hell not, right? But at the same time, people also are selected in terms of whether they participate in there or not. So these are sort of the things about interviews in a very general sense. Okay, so now how do we use interviews? Yeah? What can we do with them? And there are 2 different approaches that I want to highlight. First one is what we call, or in the literature sometimes called, the interview as a tunnel. The interview is a tunnel. What that means is you really want to go down and you want to dig something out and bring it up to the surface. Yeah. You want to go down, I'm talking with you, I'm interviewing you, for you to reveal something that I didn't know yet. Yeah? Some information, some piece of information that I didn't know about, I don't know, how the world works or what you think and so on. You might wonder, okay, well, isn't that straightforward? But you will see in a second that's actually not that straightforward. I will contrast that with another way of using the interview. So when you think of the interview as a tunnel, it is about what does an interviewee, and that's basically, when I'm interviewing you, I'm the interviewer, you're the interviewee. What does an interviewee say about a certain topic? What do you say about the relationship to your parents? What do you say about your relationship to being Irish or fighting for Ireland in a war, or things like that? And there you see all the things that we talked about so far matter here in exactly the same way. Good questions, good question order, good interviewer behavior. I need to be aware of what I'm doing here, or good interviewee behavior, that I need to somehow assure that you guys are honest in your answers. Right? You could lie, right? And actually, that's what we know. Funnily, with these things, when they ask you questions about your sexual behavior, there's a huge bias here, depending on whether the interviewer is male or female. Right? So when a male is interviewing a male participant, there's over-reporting. There's much more over-reporting than if the interviewer would have been a female, for example. So these are the things, but it's the idea to get to that piece of information, right? So what does an interviewee say about a certain topic? What are problems with that approach? Well, as I already highlighted, people want to be seen in a certain light. Imagine there's a TV team in your bedroom. What are you going to say? You don't want to look like an idiot, right? You don't want to be seen in a certain light, and sometimes that even happens on an unconscious level. Right? We are not even aware of how that actually works, but we present ourselves in a certain way. We want to be seen in a certain way. And that can be social desirability. We think what is socially acceptable, or we think what looks cool, or we want to present ourselves in a certain way. So that's a big problem when you think about the interview getting to that piece of information, to this gold nugget down there that you want to mine, that you want to get. Another problem is that people think they remember stuff correctly, but actually they don't. Right? So they truly believe that this is sort of how something happened, but maybe they are wrong, or maybe this is just their perspective on things. Right? So maybe I'm going to interview some of you guys after this course, and some guys say, oh, this is an awesome course. And others say, oh, this was a shitty course. That was exactly the same course, but it's your perspective on things. Right? So if my aim is to get to this objective truth underlying that thing, I need to be aware that people see the world through their eyes, yeah? And that maybe they don't remember correctly either, right? Or that they have different viewpoints of seeing things. A third problem with the interview as a tunnel is that there is a reactivity to interviews. And in open interviews, this is even more so, right? We already talked about this reactivity in the context of surveys, right? You guys answered the question very differently depending on a simple little wording change that I gave you. Now imagine this being a constant feedback process where we sit together and you look at me and I ask you questions, and then depending on that I probe, I follow up on some stuff, and then you say something again. So these problems are all magnified here, right? It allows you to get some other stuff that, let's say, a more standardized survey doesn't allow you to get to, but it also brings some other baggage with it. Amongst others, this reactivity to the context of the interview and to the interviewer. And then lastly, some people say, maybe language cannot express what people really think or feel, right? So, but that's sort of an extreme point. Some people say we cannot put things in numbers, but then why not say maybe we cannot put things in words either, right? So what is sort of now a second view on that? Right? And thinking of this interview as a tunnel, that might have been the way you thought about that. But now let me mention another one. And that's the interview as a topic. That's what people realized, is that individuals react to the interview situation in a certain way. Then the focus of the study is not what they say, but how they say it. It's basically the reaction, right? It's not about what those kids on television say about their relationship to the parents. It's about the breaks that they have and they think about it for a while, or how they get uncomfortable, or how they are happy talking about that. So you see, it's not the content, it's not kind of getting to this piece of content with the tunnel, but the interview itself is the topic, is sort of what we talk about. So then the question is, how does an interview really say something, right? Then I'm in an interview situation, and then I really document how you react to my questions. And that's what good interviewers do, right? They have field notes. They kind of are very detailed in the description of where does the interview take place. How does the person react? What did you do? What was sort of the feedback, the consequence of that? So then it's better this focus on how does an interviewee say something. And that's sort of this other step. The people had to realize that when you do an interview, these are the things that play a role here, right? Okay, so then some folks say there is no real social world, while others say there is something. That's where I belong to as well. I told you I think there are some true social realities out there, right? So when I interview you, you will tell me something. Maybe it's a consequence of what I did, but there's going to be some objective truth underlying that as well, right? And that's where we come into play, and that's sort of what mostly nowadays people do. They think of the interview as an interaction. And when you are a researcher, you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of how does an interviewee react in interaction with the interviewer on what, right? So that's sort of how the interview goes. So lastly, let me just mention four different types of interviews. As I said, we have different levels of control. By the way, that's a control center at NASA where I was last October. So exciting. Yeah. They still have it. And it's really about how much control do we give away to the participants of a study. You could have this in a very relaxed way, and it's very conversational. That means you don't have a fixed topic. You don't have fixed questions, and then you can become more and more structured. But I might talk about more of that on Wednesday, right? So no reading for Wednesday. Have a look at the exam preparation guide and go to your tutorials and tell your tutors about the stuff you would like me to revisit next week. Okay, thank you very much, guys.